So this is going to be quite a contrast, I think, to Penn's reading. As I say, something completely different. So this is a travel memoir of a trip I took to Japan with my husband, my son, my Japanese daughter-in-law, and my 6-month-old granddaughter back in 2009. So when they invited us to travel to Japan, they invited us to a special Shinto memorial. It was for the 10th anniversary of my daughter-in-law's father's death. And this was something so unique and fascinating. We were honored to be invited. And we also looked up friends that were there. And as an English teacher, I had old students as well that I got in touch with when we went to Japan. It was a very intense, immersive experience. And it started as short stories, and the short stories gradually grew and grew until I thought, hey, I've got a book here. And here we are. So it was very difficult to decide what to read. So I'm just going to read a couple of sections. Just give me, Lara, just give me a nudge if I go over my 20 minutes, okay? All right. So our first week we were there, we stayed in the country town of Tateyama with Mariko and her husband Yuji. And Mariko was an English teacher, Japanese English teacher that we'd met in Canada. She'd retired to the country. And when we went to her house, she decided as a teacher, she was going to teach us all about Japanese culture to prepare us for our future travels through her country. So I'm just going to start with our very first experience of Japanese culture, which was how to take a bath. What temperature do you like your bath water? Asked Mariko. Our husbands, Mike and Yuji, were downstairs drinking tea. I was upstairs with Mariko. I knelt next to her on the gray fiberglass floor and watched the water run into a half-size bathtub about 4 feet long. I hesitated. The temperature of my bathwater was not something I had ever seriously considered. What temperature do I normally have my bathwater, I wondered. 35 degrees, 36, 37? Unsure how to answer, I decided to leave the decision up to Mariko. What temperature do you like? I asked. 40 degrees, she answered, as if this was a very serious matter indeed. She opened a small white control panel on the wall and jabbed the buttons inside. She turned off the tap, unrolled a white slatted wooden cover, and laid it over the top of the tub. There, she said, I have set the controls to heat the water up to 40 degrees at 10 o'clock tonight. She pointed to a showerhead protruding from the opposite wall of the bathroom. You will need to clean yourself before you get into the tub. There is a stool there. Sit on it to wash your feet. There is soap and shampoo on the shelf. And please do not let any water out of the tub. After Mariko showed me the bathroom, provided bathing instructions, and set the water temperature, we joined Mike and Yuji downstairs in the living-cum-dining room, where we sat around a table eating rice crackers and drinking green tea. Mariko put down her teacup and produced a sheet of paper, on which she had laid out a grid containing a detailed schedule for the following week, which included sightseeing, school visits, a pottery class, and a tea ceremony. Why do you stay with us? She said. I can teach you about Japanese culture. It will be useful, I think, because you will be visiting other people while you are here. After dinner, we will have a bath. In Japan, she continued, a phrase she would repeat every time she introduced new cultural information, we have a hot bath every night. Mike protested. Actually, I prefer a shower. And some of you listening know my husband. So, yeah. Mariko pulled herself up to her full height of 5.5 feet and attempted to look my 6'4" husband directly in the eye. In Japan, she repeated, quietly but firmly, we have a hot bath every night. A bell chimed from somewhere upstairs, and a high-pitched female voice wafted from a small speaker on the kitchen wall. "Ah, your bath is ready," said Mariko. "Lesley-san, you can go first and then Maiko-san. But please remember, do not let out any water." Upstairs in the bathroom, I followed Mariko's instructions carefully. I squatted on the miniature stool, ran the shower, and scoured the top layer of my skin with a cloth that felt like steel wool. I reached up for the shower nozzle and rinsed off the soap, along with any remaining loose skin cells. Finally, I unrolled the tub cover and stepped carefully into the preheated water. As I lowered myself into the tub, the water level rose. By the time it reached my armpits, the water was half an inch from the rim of the tub. I panicked. I wanted to submerge my shoulders, but realized that if I sank down further, the water would spill onto the floor. I reached down for the plug to do the one thing Mariko had told me not to do. I let out some water. Submerged to my chin in hot water, I released the accumulated stress of the flight from Vancouver. When I got out of the tub, thanks to my preparatory shower, the water was still perfectly clear. When Mike came upstairs for his bath, I told him how I had avoided flooding the bathroom. He dismissed my anxiety with a laugh. "You know, you wouldn't have hurt anything. The floor's covered with fiberglass, so it's waterproof. And there's a drain right there in the middle." He looked at the 4-foot tub. "I don't think I'll fit into that. I'm not even going to try. I'll just shower." "Okay," I said. "I'm going to bed." I stumbled across the hall to the bedroom, collapsed onto the futon, and slipped my feet under the covers. It felt odd sleeping on the floor, like camping outdoors, but I was so relaxed from my bath that I was asleep before Mike came to bed. The next morning, Mariko dropped 4 eggs into a pot of boiling water. "Lesley-san, how was your bath last night?" I thought it might be fun to entertain her by describing my experience with water displacement. When I got in the tub, the water started to rise. It got up to the rim of the tub, and I was worried I'd flood the floor. I grinned at Mariko, expecting at least a smile in return, but her face remained impassive. I decided that apologies might be in order. "I'm sorry. I had to let some water out." No reaction. I was worried that my attempts at humor had been lost in translation. "What about Maiko-san?" Mariko asked. "Well, actually, he just took a shower." "Oh, why?" "Well, he likes showers." Mariko frowned. "But in Japan, we always take a bath at night." I decided to level with her. Because he's so tall, he didn't think he'd fit into the tub. Mariko pursed her lips, which was probably not a good sign. Please let me show you a Maiko-san in the garden." Okay, so we went out for the day, and then we came back home, and then it was after dinner, it was time for the bath. So back at the house, Mariko invited Mike and me to relax in the well-worn armchairs in front of the TV and disappeared into the back of the house with Yuji. When she returned, she asked me to follow her past the foot of the stairs into the downstairs bathroom at the front of the house. When she opened the door, I was astonished to see a full-size tub. "This is our bathroom," she said. "Yuji and I have been talking. We have decided that you can use our bath. Tonight, you and Mike-san will take a bath first. Yuji and I will take a bath after you." I was surprised that Mariko and Yuji had felt it necessary to hold a secret discussion about our bathing habits, and stunned that even though Mike was showering himself clean, they thought his ability to take a nightly bath was more important than their privacy. I thanked Mariko for her open-hearted generosity and tried not to think about the fact that 4 adults would be reusing the same tub of bath water for the whole of the following week. Okay, so we had a wonderful week in Tateyama, which is a beautiful farming community, farming and fishing community. And then we went into Tokyo to meet our son, daughter, and granddaughter and get to know the family, the in-laws. And Tokyo was a complete contrast to Tateyama. It was an assault to the senses, and we experienced, sensory overload. A lot of drama, an earthquake, a gas leak, even a hotel fire. So I'm going to tell you about the hotel fire. So we were heading out of the hotel to have dinner with my daughter-in-law's family and her mother, Suzume. The hotel lobby was bedlam. Sirens blared. Red and yellow lights flashed. Fire hoses snaked across the floor. The driveway outside was blocked by 2 Saitama City fire trucks emblazoned with the name Saitama Braveheart. A circle of firemen in yellow helmets and green jackets stood by the front desk, holding a meeting. 5 blue-shirted paramedics clustered around an empty gurney. A chef in a tall white hat ran back and forth. White aproned kitchen staff huddled in a corner. A dozen gray-haired, black-suited businessmen stood outside the glass front door in a haze of cigarette smoke. Mike and I were on our way to dinner at Suzume's house. There were no fire bells ringing, but we had realized something was happening when we noticed flashing ceiling lights, now blue, now white, as we walked from our room to the elevator. Mike took off his backpack, heavy with gifts for an unknown number of family dinner guests, and dropped it to the ground outside the elevator. Weird there were no alarm bells, he said. If we hadn't come out of our room, we wouldn't have known anything was up. I walked around the huddle of firemen to the front desk, where a solitary clerk with a worried expression on his face was watching the goings-on from behind the counter. What happened? I asked. Fire in kitchen, he said. More firemen joined the circle by the front desk. The sour-faced businessman outside lit more cigarettes. I was about to ask the clerk to call a taxi when one of the businessmen marched through the front door. He strode across the lobby to the front desk and yelled a string of abuse, from which I caught the word taxi, the Japanese for taxi. Stone-faced, the clerk yelled into the phone. He gripped it so tightly I thought he might snap it in half. His voice was a jagged edge. He was a wound-up spring, ready to snap. I walked back to stand with Mike and watch the action. I don't think it's a good idea to talk to the guy at the desk right now, I said. He seems kind of stressed. The fire trucks turned off their sirens and the kitchen crew disappeared. I decided to approach the desk clerk again. Sumimasen, I begged as gently as I could. Takashi, kudasai? His eyes widened and his face blanched. Takashi? Ima? He wailed. Taxi, now? The A sound at the end of Ima rose to a crescendo worthy of Pavarotti. Then he ran off into the back office. Oh, no, said Mike. He's lost it completely. It doesn't look as if we're going to get a taxi anytime soon, does it? I was in a panic. I wanted to make a good impression on Yome's family, and I knew the importance of punctuality in Japan. This is awful, I said. We're already an hour late. What's Suzume going to think? There's a fire in the hotel and you're worried about what people think, said Mike. I don't think it's a real fire, I scoffed. The only smoke I can smell is from the cigarettes out front. But the clerk hadn't snapped. When he returned from the back office with a slim young lady with thick shoulder-length hair, I realized he had gone to get help for us. Our savior was dressed in a crisp white blouse and a navy suit with a short, tight skirt. She was also wearing 3-inch heels. She grabbed Mike's gift-filled backpack without saying a word. She stretched her free arm out towards us, flopped her hand limply in front from her wrist, and waved her dangling fingers back and forth like octopus tentacles. The Japanese gesture for come. She ran out of the front door and leapt over the tangle of fire hoses outside, obviously determined to get us somewhere in a hurry. Mike strode after her. I struggled to keep up without tripping on the hoses. Once past the fire trucks, she started to run as if she was competing for the 100-meter dash, her heels clicking like castanets. We followed, huffing and puffing as we tried to keep up, along the road and down a side alley to a parking lot of green and white taxis. Without waiting for a thank you, she bowed, handed Mike the backpack, and raced back towards the hotel. Mike got in the nearest taxi, and I dropped in behind him. The taxi was squeaky clean, and the backs of the passenger seats were covered with white crocheted doilies. I dug through my purse for the directions that Suzume had written on a small scrap of paper. I pulled out the crumpled note and handed it to the taxi driver, who I was surprised to see was a young lady wearing immaculate white gloves. She accepted my wrinkled offering on the flat, cotton-covered palm of her open hand as if it was a precious museum object, and studied it for a few minutes before she pulled out of the parking lot. I looked at my watch. Suzume had asked us to come at 6 o'clock. It was 7:30. I laid my head back on the starch lace headrest and silently practiced apologies in Japanese. So we stayed in a town called Urawa, which was a suburb just north of Tokyo. And the local soccer team, the Urawa Reds, was competing in the Asia's Cup. And actually they won it. And the local bar, Ricky's, which is supposedly the oldest bar in Urawa, was considered the local soccer bar. So my husband loves beer, so we stopped in the local soccer bar one night to see what was going on. We walked into Ricky's cavernous interior. The place was packed with fans watching a soccer game on large overhead TV screens. I had found Japanese people quiet and reserved, but the noise in Ricky's was deafening. Each time there was an exciting play, the crowd let out ear-shattering cheers or booed with beer-soaked gusto. We sat at the bar next to a short 40-year-old man in a dark business suit with his eyes glued to the soccer game. Mike ordered 2 glasses of yabisu beer, and we examined the food in a glass case behind the counter. The game paused for a commercial break, and the soccer fan turned to Mike. "Hello, my name Yutaro. What your name?" "Mike." "Where are you from, Michael-san?" "Canada," said Mike. He looked up at the overhead TV. "Who's playing?" Yutaro spoke little English, so we communicated in a mixture of broken English, broken Japanese, and searches in the dictionary. "This team, Chiba Reserve," said Yutaro. "Not my team. Urawa Reds, my team. Play Asia Cup. Ricky, Urawa Red Bar. Ricky, oldest bar, Urawa. Ricky, my bar. I love Ricky. I love soccer. Number 1 fan, Urawa Red soccer team. I follow team." He meant this literally. "Last year, I go Korea, follow Reds. Now Reds play Asia Cup in Iran. Tomorrow I go Iran. I buy you beer." The bartender put 3 glasses of beer on the counter. Yutaro repeated, "Tomorrow I go Iran. Maybe die there." He raised his beer glass and toasted us with a hearty "Kanpai." Perhaps Yutaro's fear of traveling to the Middle East was real, even though the Iran-Iraq War, this was in 2007, okay? The Iran-Iraq War had been over for several years. Perhaps he was confusing currently peaceful Iran with Iraq, where bombings and mass shootings were a common occurrence. Or perhaps he was over-dramatizing as an excuse to drink beer. But whatever the reason, he was determined to keep the beer flowing. My headache faded as I enjoyed a cold glass of Yebisu lager. "What do you do?" asked Mike. "Store window designer," said Yutaro. Yutaro waved his arm in the direction of the bartender. "Me store window designer. He's skating champion." I was impressed. "Really? That's great." I gave the bartender an admiring smile, which seemed to irritate our new drinking companion. Yutaro scoffed. "Ha! Me window designer. He work bar. Low-class person." He turned to the bartender. "You, more beer." The Chiba team were losing 2-0. Yutaro lost interest in the game. He got off the bar stool and wandered away. We looked at the food behind the bar. The pale sausages and other mysterious items floating in watery brownish sauce under the glass cover were nastily unappetizing. Yutaro had told us that Ricky's was the oldest bar in Urawa. The bar snacks looked almost as old. "I don't fancy any of that stuff," said Mike. "Maybe we should finish our beer and go somewhere else to eat," I said. Anyway, the evening went on. We had more beer. He brought friends over. It got very bizarre. And eventually we decided to leave. So I got up from the table, said goodbye to Yutaro, and headed to the door. It was raining. So a waiter by the door handed Mike and me clear plastic umbrellas. Yutaro followed us into the downpour and pointed down a narrow alley. "Come," he said, "drink more beer." "I don't like this," I whispered to Mike. "This guy's been way too friendly. Maybe he's planning to rob us." "Nothing to worry about," said Mike, who was full of Yebisu courage. "I'm twice as big as this guy. There's no way he's going to roll me." Feeling lightheaded, I followed Yutaro and Mike to a small hole in the wall at the far end of the alley. The interior was tastefully decorated with soft lighting and honey-colored wooden wall panels. The food behind the bar, meatballs on sticks, rice balls, and skewered vegetables, was much more appealing than the food at Ricky's. The small group of late-night drinkers in the bar seemed to know Yutaro and bowed to him respectfully. He introduced us to the girl behind the bar and told us she was a low-class street food vendor. Mike practically fell onto a bar stool. "Thanks for all the beer, Yutaro. I'll get this round." "No, I pay," insisted Yutaro, turning to the female bartender. "You, give beer." So the evening progressed. We kept on drinking beer. Each time Mike emptied his glass, another full one appeared, compliments of Yutaro, who continued sharing his love for the Urawa Reds and his fears about Iran. Suddenly, he came to a stop. At a loss for words, he put down his glass, headed to the far side of the bar, and dragged over a tiny human in a light grey suit who stood a little over 4 feet tall. Yutaro said something to his miniature friend, who retrieved a small dictionary from his inner jacket pocket and rifled through the pages. When he couldn't find what he was looking for, Yutaro swiped him on the side of his head. Mike held his beer glass and swayed in his seat. "Look at these guys. They're like Laurel and Hardy." Yutaro said something else and took a swig of his little buddy's beer. The Laurel and Hardy act continued for the rest of the night. Whenever Hardy Yutaro's English failed, he yelled at Laurel and swatted him on the head. Laurel stoically took the abuse and stuck his nose into his dictionary while Yutaro took gulps of his beer. We wondered what was going on. Mike thought they were a gay couple, but if they were in a relationship, it seemed to be a strange, if not an abusive one. There had to be another explanation. I wondered if they were drinking buddies, putting on a comedy act for our benefit. Then I thought about the snobbish way Yutaro had talked about the bartenders. Perhaps this was how he generally related to low-class people. Or maybe this was something completely outside of my experience. Anyway, then things got more bizarre. Actually, a good place to start. Thank you.